The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
We're at the interview part of the show. Today joining me is author Rick R. Reed. Thank you for being here, Rick.
You're very welcome, and thank you for using the full Rick R. Reed name, which is kind of important because there's another author who is called Rick Reed and who writes somewhat similar stuff. Our paths cross sometimes and people get us confused, and it's lovely when someone says, "Oh, I love your work and I love this book," and they name something that he wrote. So I always appreciate when they use the middle initial.
Yeah, I've learned that the hard way because I'm in the same boat. I have books out and I have to go under Alan R. Warren because there's an Alan Warren that, well, he's a foot doctor, but he has a lot of books out. So I don't write about feet, but
yes, I'm not going to make any jokes about putting your foot in it or anything. But,
yeah, I've heard it all. Well, he started before I did, so by all means. But no, and I write about murder and true crime. So this is feet doctor is kind of different, but that's good. Rick, so this is an interesting book you've got. It's coming out, the launch date is July 20th. Now, The Man from Milwaukee. And so this is, wow. Are you a true crime fan? Is that how you got to write this sort of story or incorporate Dahmer into it?
I am very much a true crime fan. Like out on my runs, which I do regularly. Often I'm either listening to disco music or I'm listening to true crime podcasts. And I've always loved true crime and reading books and listening to podcasts and documentaries and stuff like that. The criminal mind, for some reason, and serial killers in particular have a fascination for me. So, yeah.
So now Dahmer's incorporated in this. What made you? This is a big question, or it's kind of too much here. But I was going to say, what made you write this book? Was there a particular reason or something that happened that sparked this sort of idea of a book?
Well, I do. The book takes place in July of 1991, which is when Jeffrey Dahmer was first arrested. So my main character is a closeted young man in Chicago who reads about his arrest and becomes kind of obsessed with Dahmer and his story. And there's sort of a weird parallel between the two of them because my main character is so self-loathing of his sexuality that he sort of identifies with a serial killer, which is, a very dark area. And he begins writing to Dahmer in prison. And I suppose that little tidbit there about him writing to Dahmer in prison was something, and maybe this is where the spark of the idea started all those many years ago. My first novel came out in 1991, and it came out right in July, which was the same month Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested. And I was sort of high on my first novel, which was about a serial killer. It's called Obsessed. And I wrote to Jeffrey Dahmer in prison myself and said I would like to tell his story. I'd like to give him a chance to, be his advocate, not his advocate really, but to allow him to speak, be a mouthpiece for him, I suppose, right, without actually letting him eat my mouth. But he never answered me. But maybe that's where the seed of the idea came from. And the book is kind of about having compulsions that we want to control and can't, And I think my main character translated his self-loathing to Dahmer's compulsion to kill and compulsion to keep men with him. And so that's kind of where the idea came from.
Wow.
And it started as a short story with just the main character reading about the arrest in the Chicago Tribune, and he's on the L, and when he gets home, he decides to write to Dahmer, and that's where the story ends. But I always thought, there's so much more to this, and so this year I finally got around to expanding that story to book length.
Yeah. Do you think this is a good representation, like, as in the sense of there are a lot of people out there in the position of your character, of being in the closet still in 2020 in these times, and yet they pick people in the news that they relate to because there's something that they feel that person represents in themselves, like, there's a connection. So even though that person is maybe an awful person, they feel a connection. Do you think that goes on a lot more than we know?
I think it probably does. I think anybody who's famous or infamous is going to attract, because they're so notorious, they're going to attract the public's attention, and the public is made up by a wide spectrum of people who might latch on to that person who's in the spotlight for various reasons. And that's what happens in this book when he begins writing, and then he starts getting answers from Dahmer, and the tension sort of builds. Where is he going to go with this? How inspired is he going to be by Jeffrey Dahmer? And so...
So do you think that when you were writing this, did you want your character to be did your character want to become really close with Dahmer? Did he want to become friends?
Yes, very much so. And he thinks they have become friends because of their letters. And he thinks he's probably one of the only people in the world that understands Dahmer, and so he believes that he's maybe like Dahmer's only friend. And the interesting thing about this was I started writing it as I thought it was going to just be this kind of horrific thing, but it ended up being about a lot more than horror. It ended up being about redemption and healing and love and forgiveness by the end of the book. But I can't go into a lot of detail without spoiling it, because I hope it's a page turner, and people will be surprised at the twist it takes.
Yeah, no, it's an incredibly interesting story. The maybe this, well, when you wrote it, and at the end of the time, someone goes out right now and picks up your book and reads it. What is it you hope they walk away with? Is there something in the back of your mind that you're thinking about that they might get?
If I imagine myself on your therapist's couch, I would go with my gut, and my first thought when you asked that question was, I hope they come away with the power of forgiveness, because that's really, I think, the lesson that comes through. And I'm not, you have to read the whole book.
Right.
Because I'm not advocating forgiveness for horrible serial killers, although forgiveness can't be, I don't know that it can be qualified by, because forgiveness is really, is for the person who's doing the forgiving rather than the person out there that needs forgiveness. So I think the ultimate message is about forgiveness and healing.
Right. Right. Oh, for sure. And it is about the person that's been hurt usually, right? Or a victim. It's not necessarily about the attacker, So
it's the only way you can move ahead, and it's grace that we can receive, and some people I've read about who have forgiven. There's one. I don't know if you're familiar with the case of Dirty John Meehan. There was a movie made about him, and there was a podcast about him.
Right. Yeah, I'm slightly familiar with it. Yes, yeah.
Anyway, just to make a long story very short, in that that's a true story. This is the greatest example of forgiveness I can imagine. A mother in that story whose daughter was murdered by her husband, and the mother goes to see the son-in-law who killed her daughter in prison. She testifies for him for the defense, and that to me was like, wow. I don't know if I have that. I don't know if I would have that within me to have that much forgiveness. But she had such strong faith that she could do that, and I thought it was kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, with this, do you think Jeffrey Dahmer was a real negative on the gay community? That he was a gay serial killer. Like, do you think it something like that is used against the community?
Well, I would hope not. I would hope that people realize that Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy and Larry Eiler in Chicago, if you're familiar with him, Dean Corll in Texas, they're all serial killers who would be considered gay. But I don't even know. I would hope people wouldn't lump those fringe elements into what being gay is about. Of course not. So I'm using Dahmer as how closeted people can come to hate themselves for who they are, and yet feel compelled to want to express their sexuality and have an almost uncontrollable urge to do that, as we humans do. And and to have that mindset, how do I fight this? And, someone who's like my main character, who's identifying with a killer because he just thinks, oh, I understand where that's coming from. And he probably didn't want to kill all those men. He just wanted them. And this is a motive often ascribed to Dahmer, is that he just wanted them to stay with him. And he was trying to keep them. So
your main character, Emory Hughes, how did you create that character? Where does that come from? Is it someone that you've known before, someone you've met? Is it some just a combination of people? I'm always interested because being more nonfiction true crime in my writing, I always have real people. So it's, I don't create characters. So in fiction writers, it amazes me how you can create this person. So where did he come from?
Well, he's not modeled on like any particular person. I suppose the very seed of him comes from, my own. I mean, I didn't come out until I was 30. I was married to a woman. I have a child, and I really fought against being gay for a good part of my life. And so I understand that self-loathing, that unwillingness to accept who you are. So I think those feelings got put into my character. And creating him, characters come to me very organically. I just, imagined this young man in the first scene in the book where he's on on the L going home from his very boring 9-to-5 job and reading about the arrest of Dahmer. And I wanted to make him so unremarkable. I didn't want to make him extremely weird. I wanted to make him the kind of person that was sort of invisible, that no one noticed. But he's harboring this actually kind of madness. And he's trying so hard to do what he thinks is right. And there's another added layer of his hatred for his own homosexual side. I bring in the AIDS crisis, which was in 1991 when Dahmer was arrested. It was a death sentence. It was something that people really feared. And Emory's mother in the book is dying from AIDS, and it's due to a blood transfusion, but his relationship with her is kind of skewed because of his feelings about his own sexuality and the gay community. And so anyway, I'm probably going on much more than you need to hear.
No, it's all good. I mean, it's always interesting to hear the process. You know, I've had quite a few fiction writers on that have talked about their characters as if they're like their children. They become a very big part. So do you feel the same way?
Yes. That's probably key to my whole process, is creating characters that I come to love and care about. And then the craziness for people who don't write or create is that they become so real to me that they start doing things and saying things that surprise me. And writing about them is as much of a journey for me as it is for a reader, because I'm not always sure what they're going to do or say. I just have a general idea of where things are going to go. But once those people are real in my head, then they kind of take off.
So do day-to-day events affect the mood of your characters? So, and this is what I mean. So in today, you know, currently there's, you know, COVID-19 protests. There's a dumbball president. There's all this stuff going on, right? And a lot of rage and anger. So there's all that going on everywhere you look. So when that happens, and you have these characters like this one in this book, this Emory, do they become dark as well? Are they affected by what happens to you?
That's an interesting question, but it's kind of hard to answer. My initial response, I think what I immediately thought is, when I write about things, I need to have a little distance from them, so I have more perspective. Like right now, I just finished a new book and just signed a contract for it, and as I was writing it, I thought, and it's all set on this one particular Saturday night in a small town gay bar, and it's kind of delves into the lives of its patrons in each chapter. But I was writing it and I was thinking, oh God, you know, they can't do any of these things that they're doing in the book. You know, they're dancing, they're flirting, they're sitting shoulder to shoulder in a bar. They're, you know, none of that could happen now. So I found myself putting a note at the beginning of the manuscript to readers saying, you know, this is an escapist book and it doesn't reflect the reality of what we're living with right now in this time frame. So, so to get back to your question, I think I think I won't be able to write about like the pandemic or our political climate or any of that stuff that's going on right now until it's a little more in my rearview mirror. Right. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just find it interesting that if you have, you know, if the emotions of the world affect your writing.
Well, I think they have to a degree. But what I try to do when I actually am writing is I block all that out. And I sort of I think it's almost a form of self-hypnosis. I think I sort of go under, and I go into the story very deeply. It's almost like conscious dreaming.
Yeah. Do you cut yourself off of other writers when you're writing as well? Like, so in your writing process, do you avoid listening to other writers or reading their books during that time?
Oh, no. No, I'm inspired by other writers, and I'm always reading, and I think I'm always learning, either directly or through osmosis, style and technique, and I get ideas from other writers that I can make my own, and so no, I eat up other writers' work all the time, and I don't think it affects me negatively at all as a writer myself.
So who is Rick reading now?
Right now, I just finished Anything is Possible by Elizabeth Strout, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Her most famous book is Olive Kittredge, which won the Pulitzer Prize. And she writes about little epiphanies, small-town people, and she writes very kind of novels that are very episodic in terms of delving deeply into individual characters in different chapters, and most of her books are like this. So I just finished that actually this morning. And she was part of my inspiration for the book I wrote about the small-town gay bar that I mentioned, because it goes deeply into a few different characters and how their lives change on this one particular summer Saturday night.
Have you been writing? You've been writing, you said, since '91, so that's almost 30 years. What was your initial draw into writing? Like, how did you get into this?
Well, I mean, my first novel was published in 1991. It was a new line of horror from Dell called Abyss. And I felt very lucky to be part of that. It was also Poppy Z. Bright's introduction to the world in that line, and Kathy Koja, who's also somebody I admire very much. Tanith Lee was published by them. Dennis Etchison. It was the editor of that made the line her baby, and there were like 2 years of these wonderful Dell Abyss books that came out, and but that was where I was first published. But I've been writing all my life. I can't imagine. I mean, I can think about writing a short story when I was 6, and writing a play when I was in 4th grade, and in 5th grade writing a serial story about a young girl being kidnapped, and my teacher let me read it in installments to the class every day, and they were just wrapped. And I think that's what kind of molded me, as wanting to be a storyteller, having to be a storyteller.
So your preference is to writing horror?
Well, I started out in horror, and I've written and I do love horror. And I love horror that is, I prefer the kind that's more grounded in reality, like serial killers and things that can actually happen, because I think that's much scarier than a vampire or a werewolf, although I've written about those too. But those are more fun. Those are more roller coaster. The really disturbing horror, I think, deals with real life things, which is why I have a fascination with crime and murder and serial killers and things like that, even though if you knew me, you'd know I'm nothing like that. I've had more than one person say, "Oh, you're so," I don't want to say meek and mild, but that's what they mean. "You're so meek and mild. How do you write these things?" Because I go into some pretty dark places in my horror. But I've also written a lot of love stories too, so that's the other side of the coin.
Just going to say it's the same thing.
They have a lot more in common than most people think about it.
Yeah, I was going to say. So why haven't you ever delved into a true crime story then?
Well, I'm a very I would think that writing true crime would be, you really need to be detail-oriented. You really need to do tons of very specific kind of research and have a real discipline. I'm more a seat of the pants kind of writer, where I have a general idea of where I know of where I want to go, and as I said earlier, kind of letting my characters come to life in my head and letting them kind of take me where the story's going to go. So writing nonfiction and true crime, as much as I like to read it, I don't know that I really have the right kind of mind for it. Because I kind of want to take off on tangents and go in different directions. And I don't know if I would feel kind of pulled down by facts and I have to stick with this, and because I'd want to do it right if I were going to do it, but it seems like it would be kind of confining for me as a writer.
Well, certainly if you want to be creative with it, it does make it more difficult. You can be creative with your style and maybe some of your wording or feelings about what you're writing, but it's tough to be creative about the characters when they are what they are, Yeah,
this is probably the first time I've written where a major true figure actually is part of a book. But somebody asked me when I did a post on social media when I was writing it, and somebody said, "Oh, did the Dahmer family give you permission to write that?" And I was like, "No, it's not. It's not a nonfiction book about Jeffrey Dahmer. It's about someone's reaction to Jeffrey Dahmer. The only way Dahmer appears on the page is through news stories and through these letters. But he's not really a character in the book. He's a fixation and a representation of something to this person." But it was kind of interesting.
You wouldn't need their permission anyway.
No, not when they're a public figure. There's a fair use, I think, is what it's called. When someone's
yeah. I mean, as long as you're within reality and you have some sources, there's really nothing to stop you.
Right.
But it's kind of how it is. So did you research Dahmer any yourself?
Oh yeah. I mean, I did a lot of research, and the book. I don't think this is a spoiler. The book, toward the end, it's the last chapter or two are motivated by him being killed in prison and how that happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to make the details in the book ring true, and I wanted to be sure they were correct. So I did a lot of going back to, the old news stories from 1991 and the news stories when he was killed a few years later in prison, and who he was as a person and who he was in prison. And so that was all kind of, that kind of research was quite fascinating for me.
Pretty interesting. So are you going to just keep writing this type, or are you going to branch off anywhere different in the future, or just going to keep sticking with this type of crime fiction sort of?
Well, it's whatever inspires me. I mean, as I said, the book I just finished and contracted with a publisher for, it was called Q, and it's about, as I said, a small-town gay bar in Appalachia, and it revolves around one eventful Saturday night in the lives of the patrons. So that's a completely different kind of story. It's a completely different kind of way I tell the story. And then I plan on working on, the next thing I want to work on is a ghost story that incorporates addiction into it. So it's kind of whatever sparkly thing catches my eye and sticks with me and kind of demands to be told.
Now, what do you think of literature nowadays, and writing and stuff? Do you think it's getting better? Do you think writing in general is better in society now, and literature, or do you think it's a little less than what it was?
It's a tough question. There's certainly a lot more of it. A digital world has opened up, I think, a lot more avenues for other voices to be heard, and some of the voices maybe shouldn't be heard, but not singling anyone out, but we don't have. When I was first published, the only way was get an agent and find a major New York publisher. That was it. And today you have a lot more options as a writer. A lot of people are self-publishing. There are a lot more small presses. So there's a lot more diversity, a lot more voices, which it's a double-edged sword. It's good and bad because it removes some of the gatekeepers, which can be good, but it can also be bad because once in a while you can take a chance on something unknown and be rewarded, or you can be really sorry you delved into that because it has become so open. But do I think it's getting better or it's worse than it used to be? I think it's the same. I think there's always people who want to create, and they do it in different ways, and they're influenced by their lives and what's going on around them, and that's always been true. So I would say things are the same.
Yeah.
In that regard.
So now, do you have a website or something where people can come find you at?
I did have, yes, my website is Rick R. Reed Reality, and it's actually a blog, but I used to have a rickrreed.com website, but I found it was just so much work, and I wasn't really selling from it, so it became kind of a placeholder. And I found my blog was much more interactive, and I updated a lot more, and it has all the same information that I would have on my website. So Rick R. Reed Reality at blogspot.com is my website.
Fantastic. And of course, people can find you all over social media, I'm sure.
Yes. And again, going back to the Rick R. Reed, that's how you find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Rick R. Reed, twitter.com/Rick R. Reed. So if you just look for Rick R. Reed, you'll get me. If you look for just Rick Reed, you might get the Pittsburgh Pirate baseball player, or you might get Rick Reed, the previous In Another Life detective who does write crime fiction. But if you stick with my middle initial, you'll find me.
And Grindr?
I am not on Grindr.
Oh, well, I'm always checking for people, in case they, fascinating story. Now, this is a great book. We're going to have it up on our website, as well as we'll put your blog spot up and recommend it totally, and hopefully it does well for you. And
thank you.
Glad you could take some time. And how was everything? Is everything going good for you? Has this COVID changed your life drastically, or?
Well, my life hasn't changed drastically because both my husband and I work from home. So, I mean, a lot of what we're doing is what we've been doing for the past several years. So it's not all that different. But we are missing a lot of things we used to have, where I can't remember the last time we've gone out to dinner or gone out to dinner with friends or even gotten together with friends. We're pretty much in our own little world now, which being an introvert is kind of okay with me, but I do miss, for a while I was always I always went to the gym for probably 30 years. I always had a gym membership, always went to the gym several times a week, and I had to cut that out. And it was, at first I really missed it, but after that, now I haven't been to the gym in like 4 months. I don't really miss it anymore. And I'm finding things that it's been a time of sorting out what was really important and meaningful in life and what maybe wasn't as important and meaningful as I thought it was.
Yeah.
You find out what's essential and what's not.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you taking your time out of your day and talking today about your new book and writing. The book is called The Man from Milwaukee, and our guest has been Rick R. Reed. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alan.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.